I still remember the exact smell of the barber shop that morning, the sharp mix of aftershave, disinfectant, and cheap coffee, because it burned itself into my memory as the place where my entire life cracked open without warning. It was supposed to be routine, almost ceremonial in its own way, the final grooming before walking down the aisle, the last moment of calm before the chaos of vows, speeches, and a lifetime commitment. Tony had been my barber for years, the kind of guy who knew exactly how I liked my fade without me having to explain it, the kind of guy I trusted enough to close my eyes while he worked a straight razor dangerously close to my skin. I sat there relaxed, scrolling through messages from relatives already at the venue, my phone buzzing every few seconds with excitement, jokes, reminders, and last-minute questions, all while thinking about Iris in her dress, about how surreal it felt that after 5 years together, today was finally the day we were getting married. I didn't even notice when Tony stopped humming to himself. I didn't notice the pause until I felt something cold and wrong brush across my forehead. Not hair, not skin, but something final. Then I heard the electric buzz again, closer to my face than it had any right to be, and before I could react, before my brain could process what was happening, Tony leaned back, looked at my reflection in the mirror, and said in the most casual voice imaginable, "Your wife paid me to make you ugly." At first, I laughed, because that's what you do when something sounds too ridiculous to be real, when your mind refuses to accept it as anything other than a joke. But then I looked up, and I saw my face, or at least, what used to be my face. My eyebrows were gone, completely gone, not trimmed, not thinned, shaved down to bare skin like they'd never existed at all. My smile collapsed as panic surged through me so fast it made my chest tight. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked, my voice cracking as I stared at Tony, who didn't look apologetic, didn't look embarrassed, didn't even look conflicted. He just shrugged. "She paid me $500 cash," he said. "Told me to make sure you looked ridiculous for the photos." The words echoed in my head, bouncing around without meaning, because none of it made sense. Iris loved photos. Iris obsessed over appearances. Iris had planned every detail of this wedding down to the napkin colors. Why would she do this? Why would she sabotage the one thing she cared about most? I stood up so fast the chair rolled backward, my heart pounding as I ran my fingers over my forehead again and again, hoping somehow I was mistaken. Hoping maybe the mirror was lying, but there was no denying it. 3 hours. The wedding was in 3 hours. Our relatives were already at the venue. People were flying in from out of state. There was no undoing this. Before I could even form a coherent thought, the bell on the shop door rang and my sister Kinley walked in, smiling, phone in hand, probably coming to check on me like she said she would. The second she saw my face, she screamed. Not a polite gasp, not a surprised yelp, a full-on scream that made Tony flinch. "What the hell happened to your face?" she demanded, dropping her phone as she rushed toward me. I didn't even have the energy to soften it. "Iris paid him to shave my eyebrows off," I said, numb, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Kinley's expression changed instantly, shock melting into fury. "That psycho," she muttered, already digging through her purse. She pulled out her makeup bag with the determination of someone preparing for battle and shoved me back into the chair. "Sit, don't move." She started drawing on eyebrows with a pencil, her hands shaking slightly, whispering under her breath about Iris losing her mind, about how this was not funny, about how this wasn't normal. I tried not to look at myself while she worked, but when she finally stepped back and told me to check, my stomach dropped. They looked fake, painfully fake, thick, dark, uneven arches that made me look like a cartoon villain or someone who'd fallen asleep at a party and been attacked with a Sharpie. There was no time to fix it properly, no professionals available, no miracle solution. We rushed out, my reflection in every car window mocking me as we drove to the hotel where the wedding was being held, my anxiety growing heavier with every passing minute. The moment we arrived, my cousin Mike intercepted me near the entrance, his face pale and serious. "Dude, I need to warn you about something," he said, lowering his voice. "Someone's here who shouldn't be here." I barely listened. "What are you talking about?" "I need to find Iris and figure out why she sabotaged my face," I snapped, already moving past him. "That's what I'm trying to tell you," he insisted, but I brushed him off, too focused on my own humiliation to care about whatever mystery guest he was hinting at. Inside, my Uncle Frank cornered me by the elevator, looking just as uncomfortable. "Listen, nephew, there's a situation I think you should know about," he started. "There's a person at this wedding who—" "Not now, Frank," I cut him off. "I'm not bumping butts with you again. I need to fix this eyebrow situation." The elevator doors closed before he could finish, and I didn't notice the way his face fell, didn't register the warning signs stacking up around me, because all I could think about was Iris, about getting an explanation, about understanding why the woman I was about to marry would do something so cruel on what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, asterisk. By the time the elevator reached the bridal suite floor, my nerves were shot so badly that I could feel my pulse in my ears, a steady thumping that drowned out the soft instrumental music piping through the hotel speakers, mocking me with its calm elegance while my world felt like it was actively unraveling. The doors slid open and I stepped out into the hallway, immediately spotting my best man, Jason, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. He looked up the second he saw me, and whatever expression he had been wearing before instantly shifted into something like dread mixed with urgency. "Bro," he said, grabbing my arm before I could even take 2 steps. "We have a major problem." I yanked my arm free, my patience hanging by a thread. "Jason, why does everyone keep trying to warn me about some guest?" I snapped. "I'm missing my eyebrows. That's the emergency right now." He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could get more than a syllable out, the bridal suite door flew open and one of Iris's bridesmaids, Sarah, burst into the hallway, her face flushed and eyes darting around like she was afraid someone might be listening. She grabbed Jason by the arm and started pulling him away, hissing under her breath, "You need to know that someone unexpected is here," before dragging him back into the room and slamming the door shut behind them. I stood there alone in the hallway, my reflection distorted in the mirrored wall panels, my fake eyebrows already starting to smudge slightly from sweat. The more people tried to hint at whatever secret was floating around, the angrier I became, because no one was actually helping me solve the one problem I could see and feel on my face. I marched down the hallway and knocked hard on the bridal suite door, fully prepared to confront Iris directly. Her mother answered instead, stepping into the doorway and blocking my path with her body like a human barricade. "You can't see the bride before the ceremony," she said sharply, her eyes flicking up to my forehead for just a split second before snapping back to my face. "She paid someone to shave my eyebrows off," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to keep it steady. Why, her lips pressed into a thin line, and instead of sympathy, I saw irritation. "Well, maybe you deserved it," she replied coldly. "Now, there's something you should know. There's a guest here who..." I didn't let her finish. I turned and stormed away, my head buzzing with frustration, humiliation, and a growing sense that I was the only one in the building who didn't understand what was actually happening. I was done with riddles, done with whispers, done with people acting like I was a child who needed to be protected from bad news. The ceremony was starting in 20 minutes, and I looked insane, my drawn-on eyebrows slowly melting down my face as if they were actively trying to escape this situation too. When the music finally started and everyone began taking their seats, I took my place at the altar, forcing myself to stand tall even though I could feel eyes lingering on my face longer than they should have. I told myself it was paranoia, that people always stare at the groom, that this was just pre-wedding jitters amplified by a bad haircut and worse timing. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle one by one, but instead of smiling confidently, several of them kept glancing nervously toward the third row on the left side, their expressions tight and uncomfortable. That was when my stomach dropped for the first time. Something was wrong. When Iris finally appeared at the back of the aisle, the entire room shifted, the air thickening as everyone stood. She looked beautiful, undeniably so, but her face was flushed red and her eyes looked glassy, like she'd been crying or fighting tears. She took a few steps forward, gripping her bouquet too tightly, when suddenly a man stood up from the third row and spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Iris, don't do this." The words hit the room like a slap. A collective gasp rippled through the guests, and Iris froze mid-step, her father's hand tightening around her arm as he tried to pull her forward again. "Trent, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. The man took a step into the aisle, his eyes locked on hers. "You invited me," he said. "You said you needed to see me one more time before you got married." My brain finally caught up to reality, or the warnings, the whispers, the weird looks snapping into place at once. This wasn't about my eyebrows. This was never about my eyebrows. Iris had invited her ex-boyfriend to our wedding. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I turned toward her, the pieces clicking together in a way that made my stomach churn. "Is this why you ruined my eyebrows?" I asked, my voice echoing in the silent church, so he wouldn't have competition. Iris turned to me, tears spilling down her face and smearing her mascara, her perfect bridal image dissolving in real time. "Trent was the love of my life," she said through sobs. "The one who got away. I just needed to know if there was still something there." And before I could even respond, before I could process the humiliation and betrayal crashing over me all at once, Trent stepped forward and held out his hand to her. "Leave with me," he said. "Right now. We can figure everything out later." Iris looked at me, at my ridiculous fake eyebrows streaking down my face, then back at Trent with his perfect hair, perfect timing, perfect confidence. It took her about 3 seconds to decide. She dropped her bouquet, grabbed his hand, and ran down the aisle and out of the church in her wedding dress, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence. My mother crying, my father swearing under his breath, Iris's family scrambling to apologize to everyone, and me standing at the altar feeling like the biggest idiot alive, my fake eyebrows melting completely as the weight of what had just happened finally crushed down on me. For a long moment after Iris disappeared through those church doors with Trent's hand locked in hers, nobody moved, not even the official, who stood frozen with his book still open as if the words inside might somehow explain what had just happened. The silence was so thick it felt physical, pressing against my ears until all I could hear was my own breathing and the faint smear of sweat trickling down my forehead. dragging what remained of Kinley's penciled eyebrows into uneven gray streaks that I was painfully aware of but powerless to fix. My mother was the first sound to break through the stillness, a sharp, wounded sob that echoed far louder than it should have in a room that had moments ago been filled with joy and expectation. My father swore under his breath, not quietly enough. While Iris's father stood at the end of the aisle staring at the open doorway his daughter had just fled through, his face slacked with shock and something like grief, as if he'd just watched a funeral instead of a wedding collapse in real time. I didn't know what to do with my hands or my body or my face, so I just stood there at the altar, staring forward while dozens of eyes flicked between me and the door, some filled with pity, some with judgment, some with the uncomfortable curiosity people get when they're witnessing someone else's life implode and they don't know where to look. Eventually, the officiant cleared his throat and muttered something about taking a break while everyone figured things out. But the damage was already done, and no amount of polite logistical rearranging could undo the humiliation burning through me. Guests began whispering, phones discreetly appearing in hands as people texted friends or relatives updates that would spread faster than wildfire by the end of the night, and I suddenly felt unbearably exposed, like a specimen under glass. I walked down from the altar on legs that didn't quite feel like they belonged to me, past rows of people who either wouldn't meet my eyes or looked at me with the kind of forced sympathy that only made everything worse. Outside the church, chaos had erupted, Iris's mother shouting into her phone, my aunt trying to herd relatives into some kind of damage control huddle, my sister Kinley weaving through the crowd toward me with murder in her eyes, ready to burn the world down on my behalf. "I swear to God," she said, grabbing my arm. "If I ever see her again." She stopped mid-sentence when she really looked at my face, her anger softening just enough to make room for concern. "You okay?" she asked, which was almost laughable considering the circumstances, but I appreciated the attempt. "Define okay," I muttered, my voice hoarse. We ended up in a quiet side room meant for storage. Me slumped onto a folding chair while Kinley tried to dab at my forehead with a napkin, smearing the makeup even more in the process, until I finally waved her off and let it happen, because at that point appearances felt pointless. That was when I noticed someone lingering awkwardly in the doorway, half hidden like they weren't sure they were welcome. Iris's sister, Elisa. She looked nothing like her sister in that moment. No tears, no hysteria. Just an unreadable expression and eyes that seemed oddly calm for someone whose family had just detonated a wedding. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, leaning against it with her arms crossed, studying me in a way that made my skin prickle. "So," she said finally, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Guess that didn't go according to plan." I snorted despite myself, a bitter sound tearing out of my chest. That's one way to put it. There was an awkward pause, and then she surprised me by laughing, a low, incredulous laugh that cut through the tension. "You know," she said, "I told her this would happen." I looked up at her sharply. "You knew?" She nodded. "She's been hung up on Trent for years. You were safe, stable, good on paper." Her eyes flicked to my face again, then back to mine. "She didn't deserve you." The words landed heavier than I expected, because they were the first genuinely validating thing anyone had said to me all day. We talked for a few minutes, quietly, while the muffled chaos continued outside the door, and that was when she mentioned the honeymoon, almost casually, like it had just occurred to her. "You know it's already paid for, right?" she said. "Non-refundable." I stared at her, too stunned to respond. She shrugged, then looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her before, something bold and unapologetic. "Shame to waste it," she said with a wink. "Trust me, nothing went to waste that day." I didn't answer right away, because my brain was still catching up, still replaying the image of Iris running down the aisle with another man, still grappling with the fact that my wedding had turned into a public spectacle in the span of minutes. But as I sat there, fake eyebrows half melted, suit wrinkled, dignity in tatters, I felt something unexpected stir beneath the humiliation and anger. Relief, because as devastating as the moment had been, as cruel as Iris's actions were, I realized I had just been spared a lifetime with someone who could do something like this, who could sabotage me, humiliate me, and discard me without hesitation. And for the first time since the morning at the barber shop, I felt the faintest sense that maybe, just maybe, this disaster wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning of something I hadn't yet imagined. The minutes after Elise's words stretched out strangely, like time itself had slowed to let the shock fully sink in. I sat there, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor, replaying everything in my head from the barber's smug grin to Iris's mascara-streaked face as she ran out of the church. Elisa didn't rush me, didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter the way most people would. She just stood there, arms crossed loosely, watching me with a patience that felt unfamiliar and oddly grounding. Outside the storage room, voices rose and fell, bits of argument and frantic explanations bleeding through the thin walls. But in that small space, everything felt suspended, like the world had narrowed to just the two of us and the wreckage Iris had left behind. Finally, I exhaled slowly and rubbed my hands over my face, smearing the last traces of makeup completely away. "I don't even know how to process this," I admitted. "An hour ago I thought my biggest problem was my missing eyebrows. Elisa let out a short breath that was half a laugh, half a sigh. "Honestly, that might still be the most traumatic part," she said dryly, and despite myself, I really laughed for the first time that day. It came out rough and disbelieving, but it was real, and it cracked something open in my chest that had been clenched tight for weeks. She pushed off the door and walked closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I'm not saying you have to decide anything right now," she said, "but you should know. A lot of us saw this coming. Iris has been spiraling for months. She sabotaged herself and she dragged you into it." The words hit hard, not because they were cruel, but because they made sense in a way nothing else had all day. Suddenly, the eyebrow incident, the secretive phone calls, the weird emotional distance in the weeks leading up to the wedding, all of it lined up into a pattern I'd been too trusting to see. Before I could respond, Kinley burst into the room again, cheeks flushed, eyes wild. "There you are," she said, glaring briefly at Elisa before focusing on me. "Everyone's asking what you want to do. Your parents are furious. Iris's mom keeps trying to apologize, and Uncle Frank is threatening to sue someone, though I'm not sure who." I shook my head slowly. "I don't want to talk to anyone right now," I said. "I just want out of this building." Kinley nodded immediately, protective instinct kicking in. "Say the word, and I'll clear a path." As we stepped back into the hallway, the full weight of the fallout became impossible to ignore. Guests clustered in tight groups, whispering openly now, no longer pretending this was anything but a disaster. Some people tried to stop me, offering awkward condolences or asking questions I didn't have the energy to answer. Others just stared, their eyes flicking to my face, then quickly away, as if my embarrassment might be contagious. Iris's father tried to approach me, his face drawn and apologetic, but I held up a hand before he could speak. "Not today," I said quietly, and to his credit, he nodded and stepped back. We made it outside into the afternoon air, and I sucked in a deep breath, feeling like I'd been underwater for hours and had finally surfaced. The sun was painfully bright, the world carrying on as if nothing monumental had just happened, which somehow made everything feel even more surreal. That was when my phone started buzzing relentlessly in my pocket, texts from friends, distant relatives, even co-workers who had somehow already heard. I turned it off without reading any of them. I couldn't deal with their sympathy or their curiosity yet. We were halfway to the parking lot when Elisa appeared again, jogging slightly to catch up. "Hey," she called. I turned, bracing myself for more awkwardness, but her expression was steady. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said, not in a family obligation way, in a real way. I nodded, unsure what to say. She hesitated, then added, "About the honeymoon. I wasn't joking, but I also wasn't trying to pressure you. I just didn't want you to think this whole thing had to be a total loss." Her honesty disarmed me more than any grand gesture could have. "I appreciate that," I said. "Right now, I just need space." She smiled softly. "Fair." As she walked away, Kinley leaned in and whispered, "Okay, I know it's way too soon, but she's kind of amazing." I shot her a look, not helping. She grinned unapologetically. The drive home was quiet, the adrenaline finally wearing off and leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Once there, I stripped off the suit, showered until the hot water ran cold, and stood dripping in the bathroom mirror, staring at my own reflection. Without the makeup, the missing eyebrows were obvious, ridiculous even, but somehow they felt symbolic. Rod stripped down, exposed. I thought about how much I'd trusted Iris, how willing I'd been to excuse red flags because I wanted the future we'd planned to work, and I thought about how, in one brutal afternoon, that future had been ripped away, leaving nothing but wreckage and an unexpected sense of freedom. That night, as I lay awake listening to my phone buzz intermittently on the nightstand, I realized something else, something quieter, but just as important. The humiliation would fade, the gossip would eventually die down, and the pain would scar over. But the truth that Iris had shown me exactly who she was before it was too late would remain. And for all the cruelty of how it happened, I knew deep down that one day, I'd look back on this day not as the worst moment of my life, but as at the moment everything changed. The next morning, the world outside my window felt impossibly bright, almost mocking after the emotional and physical chaos of the previous day. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept replaying every moment of the wedding, the barbershop, the smudged eyebrows, Iris running down the aisle with Trent's hand in hers, and then Elisa.com/composed, and somehow entirely present in a way that made the disaster feel almost survivable. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, staring blankly at the floor, when Kinley burst in with a mix of urgency and excitement. "You have to hear this," she said, holding up her phone like it contained the key to the universe. I rubbed my temples. "I don't want to hear anything, not yet." "Too late," she said, flipping the phone around. Social media had erupted. Pictures of the wedding, captions of disbelief, and people sharing first-hand accounts were everywhere. Hashtags like #weddingdisaster and #eyebrowgate were trending locally. Messages from friends, distant relatives, and strangers flooded in, some offering sympathy, others judgment, and a few just poking fun. The sheer scale of it made my head spin. Kinley kept talking, scrolling through her phone. "Look, Everyone knows now, and get this, people are actually defending you. Can you believe it? After yesterday, you're the sane one. I let out a long sigh, realizing she was right. In the chaos of being humiliated in front of dozens of people, one thing had become abundantly clear: I had survived. And while I was embarrassed, I was unharmed in ways far deeper than my fading pencil eyebrows. That afternoon, Elisa called. Her voice was steady, warm, and completely without the judgment I had expected. "So," she said, "are we going to salvage that honeymoon?" I blinked at the phone, unsure if she was joking or serious. You mean it?" I asked cautiously. She laughed, a low, comfortable sound. "Of course, non-refundable, remember? And I think we both know it deserves to be used." It took me a moment to process the offer. The idea of leaving the city, of escaping the constant reminders of yesterday's fiasco, was intoxicating. For the first time in over 24 hours, I felt something like excitement, even joy, stirring inside me. Kinley, sensing my hesitation, leaned over my shoulder. "You have to go. You survived the wedding-level nightmare and you have a non-refundable honeymoon waiting. Go." By evening, arrangements were made. Elisa and I flew out together, alone, a decision that felt daring, impulsive, and strangely liberating. The plane ride was quiet, but in that quiet, I found space to think, to reflect, and to release the tension that had been coiled inside me for so long. I realized that Iris's actions, cruel and shocking as they were, had forced clarity. I understood who she was, what she valued, and more importantly, what I deserved. When we arrived at the resort, the world seemed to stretch infinitely around us. Elisa guided me to a villa overlooking the ocean. The sunset bleeding gold and orange across the water, and for the first time since the morning at the barber shop, I felt a sense of peace. We spent the next days exploring, laughing, and talking endlessly. Elisa's presence was grounding. She had a way of making me feel safe, validated, and seen, all at once. She didn't pity me, didn't infantilize me, and didn't try to fix anything. She simply existed beside me, and that was enough. Slowly I began to notice subtle changes in myself. My posture straightened, my laughter came easier, and my thoughts were no longer dominated by the embarrassment of yesterday. The memory of my melting eyebrows remained, of course, but it had transformed from a symbol of humiliation into a reminder that I could endure public humiliation, betrayal, and chaos and still come out whole on the other side. One afternoon, while we were walking along the beach, Elisa paused and turned to me. "You're stronger than you realize," she said, her gaze steady, unflinching. "Yesterday didn't break you. It just gave you perspective." Perspective, the word rolled around in my mind. She was right. Iris had been the one trying to control the narrative of my life, and she had failed spectacularly. I had survived not because of anyone else, but because I had chosen to survive. To remain present and resilient even when everything around me seemed to collapse. Over the next few days, laughter replaced panic. Sunsets replaced tears. And slowly, an unexpected bond formed between Elisa and me. What started as a comforting presence evolved into genuine affection. She understood nuances I hadn't been able to articulate, shared stories of her family, and showed me a side of life I'd forgotten existed, one without constant judgment, manipulation, or betrayal. By the end of the trip, the initial wounds of yesterday had healed enough to be considered scars rather than open cuts. We returned home, not to the chaos of a ruined wedding, but to a quiet apartment where we could begin rebuilding our lives on our terms. The social media storm had died down, gossip fading into background noise, and in the absence of Iris's interference, my life felt, for the first time in years, truly my own. I realized something profound. Humiliation, betrayal, and chaos are temporary, but resilience, clarity, and new beginnings endure. The wedding may have been a disaster, but it had inadvertently freed me, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for it, because without that mess, I might never have discovered the strength, clarity, and companionship that would redefine my life. Returning from the honeymoon was surreal, almost like stepping out of a dream into a world that had not paused while I'd been gone. The wedding disaster was still fresh in people's minds, but the immediacy of social media outrage had softened, comments had slowed to a trickle, and friends who had been in shock were now more curious than judgmental. My apartment felt impossibly quiet, but in that silence I discovered something I hadn't realized I was missing: space to think, to breathe, and to rebuild a sense of self that had been eroded by Iris's relentless control. Elisa came over the very next day, carrying a bouquet of flowers that somehow didn't feel like a consolation gift, but a tangible promise that something positive could exist after the chaos. "Welcome home," she said simply, her tone calm but imbued with warmth. I didn't know what to say at first, so I just let her hug me, feeling the tension of the last several days slowly unwind. We spent the morning unpacking the honeymoon luggage, laughing over shared memories, and replaying the moments that had terrified me during the wedding. It was cathartic to talk about the embarrassment openly with someone who wasn't trying to make me feel small or guilty. Then came the emails and texts, the relatives and friends reaching out, wanting to check on me, wanting to offer support. I realized I didn't have to respond to anyone immediately. I could take my time, prioritize my own healing, and approach each interaction on my terms. That sense of agency was intoxicating. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the subtle but profound shifts in my own behavior. I stopped apologizing preemptively, stopped trying to justify my existence to anyone, and began asserting boundaries that I hadn't enforced in years. Every time my phone buzzed, I reminded myself that I was allowed to prioritize my well-being. Elisa remained a steady presence, showing up not as a savior but as a partner in navigating this new terrain. She listened without judgment, offered insight without directing, and somehow helped me recognize my own resilience. Slowly, the embarrassment of the wedding shifted from a source of shame to a badge of endurance. The missing eyebrows became less about ridicule and more about survival, about navigating betrayal and public humiliation without losing my sense of self. Even Kinley noticed the change. "You're different," she said one evening, sitting across from me with a cup of coffee. "Calmer, stronger." I smiled faintly, realizing she was right. The wedding had been a catalyst, tearing away the superficial layers of fear and expectation that had accumulated over the years. In their place, a clarity emerged that I hadn't known I could possess. Then came the inevitable confrontations. Iris attempted to contact me once, leaving a long, tearful voicemail pleading for forgiveness and explanation. I listened once, but her words had lost their power. The anger and hurt she had caused had been processed and I no longer needed to justify myself or explain my worth to someone incapable of understanding it. When she realized I wasn't going to respond, her tone shifted to disbelief and panic, but I stayed firm. I didn't owe her access to my life anymore. Meanwhile, Elisa and I continued building something unexpected yet undeniable. Our friendship had deepened into a bond that was no longer just comforting, it was profound and intimate. Conversations stretched into the night, punctuated by laughter, confessions, and a shared understanding of boundaries and respect that neither of us had experienced before. I began to notice a newfound confidence in myself, an ability to navigate social situations, work environments, and personal relationships without succumbing to the same passive acceptance that had left me vulnerable in the first place. The wedding disaster, in retrospect, had given me the chance to recalibrate my life. My social circles shifted subtly. Friends who had been supportive deepened their connections, while those who had engaged in idle gossip naturally drifted away. This curation of my own environment created a sense of safety I hadn't realized I could claim for myself. Months passed, and the narrative of the wedding evolved. What had once been a source of embarrassment became a story of resilience and empowerment. Elisa remained a constant, and our relationship flourished under the shared experiences and mutual respect we had cultivated. I started attending events again, not with the apprehension and anxiety I had felt in the past, but with a grounded self. I no longer felt defined by the actions of others. My identity was self-contained and robust, and while the memory of missing eyebrows and public humiliation lingered, it served as a reminder of my ability to endure chaos and emerge stronger. The experience with Iris, devastating as it had been, had inadvertently revealed what I truly valued in people, relationships, and myself. It highlighted the importance of trust, respect, and genuine support, and it clarified the boundaries I was no longer willing to compromise. Eventually, I began mentoring friends and acquaintances who faced similar betrayals, using my story to illustrate resilience, personal agency, and the power of reframing adversity. Each retelling reminded me of my journey from humiliation to empowerment, reinforcing my self-esteem and sense of direction. The ultimate irony, of course, was that what had begun as the worst day of my life had become a turning point that fundamentally altered my trajectory for the better. I had faced public humiliation, betrayal, and heartbreak and survived. I had reclaimed my sense of self, built meaningful connections, and found love and support in unexpected places. The wedding disaster, once a source of dread, had become a testament to my resilience and capacity for growth. And through it all, Elisa's presence remained a constant reminder that even in the wake of chaos, genuine connections can emerge, and life can be rebuilt stronger than ever.